And we are live. Welcome to Maximum Libertarian Podcast. It is powered by the Roanoke Valley Libertarians affiliate here in Roanoke, Virginia. So today's guest, we are joined by Chad Peace. He is the founder and leader of the Independent Voter Project, correct?
Well, I'm not the founder. I'm often identified as the leader. I'm actually a consultant and a legal advisor. I do digital communications. That's my day job, but I'm pretty passionate about what the Independent Voter Project does. So,
all right, can you give us a little, tell us something about yourself, and then explain what this Independent Voter Project is?
I got into this, ironically, my libertarian roots. I got into this because when in my early 20s, I was, full disclosure, a big Ron Paul guy. I actually did a lot of the online fundraising for Gary Johnson when he ran for president. And then I was approached by the Independent Voter Project while I was in law school because they were running a top 2 nonpartisan primary initiative, asking, hey, can we do some of that digital stuff to let independent voters know that there's something they might want to vote for in the general election. I took a lot of heat from my libertarian friends, and I'll battle it till the day I die, that Independent Voter Project's on the side of the angels. But which comes down to a simple reason. What is the Independent Voter Project, right? We have a very two-party dominated political discourse and industry. And Independent Voter Project takes a step back and says, don't elections belong to the individual voter, right? And what is the building block of democracy? Is the building block through first joining a political party, whether it's the Democrats, Republicans, or the Libertarian Party, or do the building blocks of democracy derive from the individual voter, right? Our view is that voting rights derive from the individual voter. So if you're using the state's power to, for example, create a primary election system, you have to treat every individual voter the same. And on a national scale, that's not even close to true. So that's what we do. Say, challenge those rules. And in California, when we passed the nonpartisan primary, the revolutionary aspect of it, I find ironic when I argue with my libertarian friends, is say, what we did in California is we took away the primary election system from a system that was legally a system for private political parties to elect their nominee, to a system where voters, individual, small I independent voters, narrow the candidate field. So from a philosophical perspective, it's one of the only states that treats every single voter and every single party exactly the same, regardless of party affiliation. So that's what
if over in California, with the top two, if two of the individuals get in there, you don't like neither one, are you able to write people in?
You can't. There's a reason why, because from an operative perspective, this was debated. Actually, IVP, we were pretty agnostic about that issue, and we would have supported the initiative with write-ins as well. But there's a rational argument of why they didn't allow write-ins, was because the gamesmanship of the political process would have, for example, say you had, traditional Republican Democrat race, it would have been the Democrats who would go find a libertarian to run to siphon off votes, and vice versa. The Republicans would have found, right? And so how do you prevent gamesmanship? Now, we would be the first to admit there are unintended consequences, just like there are of any system, which right now, Independent Voter Project says, okay, great. We got to top 2. We have nonpartisan primaries. Let's move it to 4 or 5 like they do in Alaska, right? So one of the top of our agenda now is taking top 2 and moving it to a top 4 or a top 5. So more candidates can get onto the general election ballot, and then use ranked choice voting in the general, right, to determine a winner.
Okay. Do you like ranked choice? Have you ever seen star voting by chance?
I have, of course.
What do you think? Yes, because I've always been a big proponent of ranked choice voting, because to me it feels like, all right, you take away that, you're wasting your vote,
right? And
then when I saw the star voting, I really liked that one. What do you think of that?
I'll give you my personal. I'm very familiar with the star voting folks. I mean, now you have the Condorcet voting folks, which have a ranked pairs methodology of changing it, right? I leave a lot of that discussion to the academics because, you know, there's good arguments for and against. There's unintended consequences of every single system. What I would say, whether it's short, whether it's star voting, it's instant runoff, it's Condorcet style, to me, all of them are superior to what we have now. So I think from a reform community, right, whether instead of us all getting in and saying, look, you know, we're not going to support this because I think Star is a little better, or I think Condorcet is a little bit, like, let's advance the conversation like they did in Alaska, where they have a top 4 system. And then let's debate about it afterwards, right? But right now, it's like, okay, we're going to argue about, you know, which one's best over here, when it's like we need to make the fundamental step of exposing to voters. You don't have to choose between just two candidates.
Oh, absolutely. How do you feel that it's went since you've opened up the 2-tier system?
The nonpartisan system in California?
Yes.
Oh, so outside of California, there's a national narrative about it, but you can spend 30 minutes in the Capitol and say, is this a different political environment because of the nonpartisan primary? And they will say, absolutely. If you looked at, you think whatever, say you're coming from a more conservative perspective, and you're saying, look at California and look at, you know, they're so far left and everything. If we had a closed primary system, you would have ideologues up and down California from the left side of the aisle, right? And the Democratic Party would, more than they do now, have complete control, right? Right now, we actually, on a state level, in a lot of these Democratic districts, for example, as well, and the flip side happens in Republican districts, you get Dem on Dem races a lot because Republicans know they can't win in a general election. In those races, the Democrat that wins is usually the Democrat that actually appeals to libertarians, independents, and Republicans, because under an old system, in a closed primary, you got gerrymandered districts. You get a Democrat versus a Republican. Well, if it's a Democrat district, the race is already over. In a Republican district, the race is already over. In California, it's the first time independents and Republicans actually have an opportunity to determine the candidate that wins. Now, it might not be their perfect candidate, but they get to say, you know what? This one's way better than the one that's way over there, and we'll never even consider stuff. So that goes back to when you go, it's certainly not perfect, but there's actually a much more broader diversity of thought among the Democrats in Sacramento because of the top 2 system, because they're incentivized. They have different incentives than most states on a national level.
Did y'all see the disenfranchised actually come out and vote?
Probably not at the level we would have expected. I mean, well, I take it this way. When you have a closed primary and the semi-closed primary, none of the independents are coming out to vote. So certainly more of them are voting now, right? They don't come out in as great numbers as Democrats or Republicans, but certainly the turnout's better because something's better than nothing, right? We probably would have expected greater, but part of that too is like the way folks campaign, the consultants are so grounded in their traditional way they campaign. They're grounded in the national media and the national narratives. We've been surprised why there aren't more candidates taking advantage of California's nonpartisan system and giving folks a reason to turn out. A lot of times people go like, oh, are you surprised independents didn't vote and turn out in primaries? Like, well, did any of the candidates give them a reason to turn out? Right? If you just have a bunch of people that sound like your traditional Republican, Democrat, and there's nothing there that's special, why would you expect them to turn out? They already told you they don't, by registration, they don't really like this red versus blue dynamic.
Right. Because I think that's still one of the biggest things. Like I used to always, over here in Virginia, I'm trying to reach out to all the different people that go out and vote. But then it's like, well, I can't change the Republican and Democrat who always vote, because they'll give me a 30-minute discussion. We'll discuss it, and they'll say how their candidate's horrible, and then I'll say, well, why don't you vote this individual? And they'll say, well, he can't win or she can't win, and then but they're going to then go immediately and vote for the individual, they were just telling me how it's weak spine, no spine, spineless, weak, weak and all that stuff.
Right.
And that's it's a uphill battle. So I kind of turned and I still look, the politician has the final vote when when they go to Richmond or they go to the Capitol. They're the final vote for us. But to me, I'm now angry at the voter because they know that we're inundated with all this media. We've got internet, the insider trading, the backroom deals. And it's like, how do you wake someone up to it? And it makes me frustrated. I would imagine it makes you frustrated. Well, now you're in California.
Yeah, I'm in California. I mean, trust me, I get frustrated over things all the time, right? But
yeah,
I don't get as frustrated at the voter because it's actually very rational, right? I call it rational voter ignorance, right? Because why the amount of work to overcome the system, right? The rational view of a voter who's worried about taking care of their kids and worried about going to baseball practice and doing all that stuff is going to say, it looks like one of these two are going to win, and I'm going to vote for the lesser one I think's the least worse, right? Because that's the structure they gave voters to participate in, right? Your point about going to a top 4 or a top 5 type system, right, is now you give the voter different options and you eliminate that lesser of two evil dynamic that we've rationally put voters into having to choose among, right? Is say, look, my vote's going to have less power if I don't vote for the least worst candidate because one of these two is going to win. Well, if we can eliminate the first past the post system, right, which creates that dynamic, then we can have a more nuanced discussion. We can have candidates that run with outside of the partisan box that both parties have put us in, and actually have candidates that can win by being a little more dynamic. And then going back to the voters saying, okay, now making it rational for voters to support the person they really want to win instead of voting against the person they really don't want to win, which is what they do now.
Correct. So over here in Virginia, we've got the redistricting bill that's coming up. The Democrats took a very big lead in our state houses, and they're going to force it into April as a early voting for this constitutional amendment to do gerrymander the thing. How can nonpartisan reforms break this cycle?
Well, I mean,
because I know California has it too.
Yeah, I mean, we got the powers that be basically undid the Independent Redistricting Commission, at least for on the short term and stuff. But how do these nonpartisan? I mean, on primary elections alone, right? You mitigate the power of gerrymandering significantly, right? And take a look at California. The more the gerrymandered the district is, gerrymandered, or maybe it's natural, it just happens to be in a very left-leaning or right-leaning area, that's actually created more competition in the general election when you have two candidates from the same party pitted against each other, because now the incentives have changed, because the candidates have to say, okay, well, how am I going to win in a Democrat on Democrat race? I got to show up to the Chamber of Commerce meeting and explain to them that I have positions that business should support and things like that. So that, and then to our point, our conversation about whether it's IRV, it's star voting, it's Condorcet, whatever it is creating a non-first past the post system in the general election. That is the way to mitigate and overcome gerrymandering, right? Gerrymandering specifically, though, this is a 90-10 issue, right? If you asked voters, anybody, should politicians select their voters, or should voters draw the districts? 90% of people say, of course, voters should do it, right? The only reason nothing happens is because both of the major parties want they're on the same side when it comes to the state that they control. So voters see right through the fact that a Republican railing his hands in California or a Democrat railing their hands in Texas it's alligator tears, because they do the same thing in states that they control, right? So it's just voters have to come together and demand changes, and it's hard. It's hard.
how what what are some of the things y'all do? Yeah, I know you're just focusing on what other things do y'all focus on? I know you got the top two. That's what I was reading.
Mm-hmm.
What is the other? What are other projects you guys are working on to try to help? Because, like I said, the internet's filled with a lot of information. But we seem to stay in this one tunnel vision, if you will, of the two-party system. And we have young voters that they claim to be independent. They don't show up at the polls.
Mm-hmm.
And like, is there other projects y'all working on to try to get people in?
Yeah, and we'll work with other organizations in other states, but like for example, we are advocating to move from top 2 to a top 4 or top 5. That's one. We've also filed lawsuits. For example, we challenged New Jersey's closed primary system with a simple premise, and we've taken this all the way to the Supreme Court, actually in 2 states. Just filed an amicus brief along with the Forward Party and open primaries in Florida against the closed primary system. And the question for the Supreme Court is, should every voter, regardless of party, have an equally meaningful opportunity to vote at every stage of the election process, right? And right now, the Supreme Court obviously has not taken up that question, but it's only a matter of time, we believe, that, is it going to have to be 15 states or 20 states that go to the Supreme Court to ask that question? We don't know. What we do know is the Supreme Court actually considered the brief. It got selected for consideration in the last go around in the Supreme Court, which might not sound like a big deal, but far less than 1% of cases get selected for consideration. So our issue has been before the Supreme Court. It has had a hearing for consideration to bring up. Now, will it be another 5 or 10 years until it actually does get picked up? Well, that would be great. But that alone would fundamentally change the incentive structure on a national level and incentivize young voters. If we have a process that's more reflective of the positions of young voters and half of the American electorate that really aren't happy with the two parties, well, then we'll find more participation. But we're not surprised there's not extreme participation right now because people are so dissatisfied in both parties. They don't think it's worth their time to go to the polls.
Right. Hell, I find libertarians that are really good libertarians, they won't even go to the polls when we have a libertarian on our ballot. And I'll say, hey, we need to get this 10% so we can become a major party. And that way we don't have to collect signatures and all that stuff. And they're just like, I don't like that guy, or he's not going to win. And it's like, that's not the point. I'm fighting the 10%. I'm not trying to win. Yes, I would love to win the election, but hey, we got to win this first fight before I can go any further, And it's so frustrating, And I think that's where I get pulled, sometimes it's like, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
You see this. So what do you think about, you're talking about the Supreme Court and stuff. What do you think about Donald Trump? How have you liked the second term of Donald Trump?
See, Trump's obviously a topic is so divisive. Anytime, like if you don't say everything's negative, then you're a Trump supporter. And if you don't say everything's great, then you're a Democrat. Like my view is he's kind of a natural, predictable consequence of the system that we've created, right? He's a animal that came in, hijacked the Republican Party, right? And then he won the election and he challenged some norms. Like, do I like everything he's done? Do I think he's, gone way overboard on some stuff? Yes. But at the same time, he's also dealt with some things, that everybody kind of agrees quietly need to be done, but everybody's afraid to do. So I think there's a part of me, and I think there's a long streak of independents that are like, you know what? That's kind of, maybe we just needed a bull to go into the China shop a little bit, break some stuff so that, it creates an opportunity for other people to go put pieces back together. Now, so I have a very mixed emotion. I don't like the way he talks sometimes. I don't like that, I think he could, be a nicer person to people he doesn't agree with, and it would make for a better, maybe leadership style. Right. But, there's some things that it's like, I don't agree with him, but like he's moving, he's doing things, right? And he's not just pandering, going back to his consultant, which is what so many political people do. They render their consultant and say, what do people think about this? And then they go and they just regurgitate a poll about talking points that they know people already agree with, and people see right through it and say, at least we have somebody who thinks for themselves, and like they're telling us what they think instead of what their political consultant thinks, right? So, I mean, I have very mixed emotions about it, but that's,
the reason I ask that question is because there's a lot of things that are on the docket. Because there was a guy who ran for House of Delegates here in Virginia. He ran as an independent, but he's a Republican. But because where Roanoke's deep blue, if you will. But not everybody comes out. More people stay home and actually come out. So I think it's the Democrats that come out. Everyone else is told have been beaten into submission, and we can't win. And I told the guy, I said, Trump's running against his own party. Like, he brings stuff up, and his own party will fight tooth and nail with him under. I don't want to say it's Mitch McConnell. We'll use him as an example. And on television, he might agree with Trump, but behind closed doors, he is doing everything, putting up everything, and roadblocks. I look at the Democrats, they will rally the troops no matter what the issue is. They rally around that candidate. And I look at like things such as packing the Supreme Court, the gerrymandering here in Virginia. I was just curious, what do you think? I know that because that breaks into a lot of people, and that disenfranchises people. Breaking the filibuster. I think they want to get rid of the filibuster. So some people are saying, well, we got to do it now while the Republicans are in charge. But then the Democrats will get in charge, and they're going to do it. You know what? And that's going to disenfranchise on both sides. I don't like neither one. But what would be your suggestion? I guess my question would be.
I don't know what
if you could lead.
If I could lead, I mean, I'd open up the process. I think you have these, there's fights occur within the party. Trump came in and basically hijacked the apparatus of the Republican Party because that's where the structure has basically monopolized the process for them both, right? As what I would do is create competition, right? Right now, the only competition for the Republicans are the Democrats, right? And if you created a real competition where parties and candidates had to compete for the broad array of voters' perspectives, then you'd have a fundamentally different results and form of governments, even if the same people got elected, frankly, because you would create different incentive structure, right? And so, that's if I had a magic wand, I'd create a process where you incentivized a more mass appealing, right? I shouldn't say mass, more broad spectrum style of leadership.
Okay. Now that would lead me into the next question would be, I understand what the Constitution, each state gets to do their own elections, set it up. And now it's being pushed through the SAVE Act. What do you think of that? Like during, 2020 when I think Texas tried to challenge Pennsylvania about how they changed their election laws. Should there be some type of because if we got 50 players, if you will, that's 50 states, and everyone's playing we're playing one game, but we got 50 sets of rules. How do you? I mean, we could open it up here in Virginia, but everybody else is. What do you think of the SAVE Act and things to that nature?
Well, so this is an interesting one.
I know it's pretty big. So
yeah, it's broad. There's a lot of things in there, but I don't represent all independent voters. I advise the Independent Voter Project, and I have my own independent beliefs, right? I think when you're talking about verification, right? Some form requiring some form of ID or something, right? Like, I think that may be something that could be happened at the national level, as long as it's right? Not overburdensome stuff. But we should start from the standpoint that the United States is a partnership agreement among the several states. And in Article 1 of the Constitution, it is very clear that the time, place, and manner should belong to the states. And the reason for that, I believe, is so that we do not have a consolidation of power over elections, right? And if we're worried about authoritarianism, right, is putting it in a place where where that centralization of power over our elections can catalyze, right, and really have the most effect. If you leave the power to the states, as it's codified in the Constitution, you decentralize the ability to corrupt and monopolize elections. And even if you have a bad state actor or something that's not right, at least it's one of 50, and it's not the national government doing that, right? So that step back just from philosophical perspective, right? So as it comes to the SAVE Act, I think, there are some requirements we could do to make sure voters are actually voters, especially as it relates to federal elections. But once you get in a time, place, manner, for example, of trying to say, oh, you can or can't do ranked choice voting, or you can and can't do this type of system, or I think that's impeding on the sovereignty of the states. And I don't think it's a good direction for the country, because for whatever good you think nationalization can do, the dangers of that type of consolidation of power over the process of electing representatives is very great.
Yes. It's just, I always just look at the disenfranchised voters, and I don't want to be stepping on toes, but when people get put in power, they do dirty stuff, Are there other things that the Independent Voter Project does? Do y'all maybe have any other legislation that y'all like to try to go for, such as term limits and things of that nature?
So we've really been focused on nonpartisan primaries. We are taking a look at voter ID, particularly because we're in California, right? And say, look, that's another issue where you can say, okay, most people support voter ID, but then, the Republicans will go too far and this and that, right? And then it becomes a partisan right? So we're going to be very careful about that. We run a news site. We talk about these reforms on a national level, right? They're doing nonpartisan primaries in Oklahoma. They ran, ranked choice voting here, and we try to cover all of that as kind of that's our connection on the national level. Though, we're not going to go into Virginia and tell Virginians how to improve or change their elections, right? That's got to happen at a local level from people who, right? And but so we have the news website, we have our legal strategy, we have our independent voter podcast, and just try to be a part of the discussion. I think reforms and election reform and improving them, it starts with voters being educated that things don't have to be the way they are, right? Especially young voters who, their entire life experiences, there's this crazy level of partisan vitriol in politics, is most of them don't know that we don't have to do it that way. We don't have to, right? So let's put something on the ballot, or put something at a local level, or find a candidate that's for once willing to go out and suggest ideas that, challenge the ability of both parties to monopolize the system. And guess what? I bet you young voter turnout and independent voter turnout and libertarian turnout will increase, because there'll actually be something that you say, oh, this is different. This allows us to not accept a world that we know has been cooked against our interests.
Oh yeah. One thing that I've always wondered, and I think maybe it's just my because the older I get, that I would like to see politicians do is they throw up a suggestion, and then and then they'll even implement whatever grand idea it is, and they'll see it's not working. So instead of going, hey, this isn't working, let's change it, let's double down on it, because we can't come out and say we were wrong.
Right.
And I wish we could see politicians go, look, like I told every libertarian that I talked to, I'd say, look, you got to be willing to throw your idea onto the table and let's see what's best for the community and what gets people like the best for freedom and liberties and all that stuff.
Right.
And just people, I wish we had politicians that would be willing to do that. But then at the same time, we don't have voters. I don't know if they would be accepting to have the politician that they voted for say, I was wrong. You know, so I don't know if it would be like a either one, you know. It's like, yeah.
You know, I actually think voters are very accepting of politicians that are authentic. So authentically saying I'm wrong and I'm willing to change. I actually think voters are hungry for that, but we don't have a system that allows those folks to survive, right? And it's beyond just the conversation with the voters. It's Catherine Gell wrote a book called The Political Industrial Complex, right? And you go whether it's you start a homelessness program or you go run an initiative here, there's a whole set of, folks that benefit from that, all the way from the consultants who run the campaigns to the people who run those organizations to their right. And it's like, it gets so wedded into the system, right, that then going against this big thing that you did, you're now taking on your own political industrial complex that you created. So the easier thing is just to quietly move on to another issue, right? And that's what they do.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Or they spin up an idea, even if they don't implement it, they spin up their voter base and people rally for it, and then that individual gets put into power. And they've been pushing for, we'll just say, free health care. Now they're in power. Now they're actually pushing it, even though the person who was initially saying it was just saying it to get votes. Because I remember Jim Lark, he was talking to us once. He said a lot of times they'll say gun control from the Democrat side. They don't want anything to go through because it's easy to raise money on. Because immigration should have been fixed years ago. Yeah. This isn't a hard thing, but we've allowed it because it's easy because we can raise funds with it. And so much other stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, you go back and look at the political debates from, 20, 30, 40 years ago. I mean, you have Ronald Reagan and them talking about how, we got to have these pathways and we got to have an immigration where we can't just, and then you see Obama talking about how we can't just let people come into the country unvetted and stuff. Like they all say the same thing and then nothing happens, to your point, because, solving the issue doesn't feed the base, because then there's no evil side to go and attack to say that this issue, right? So yeah, it's a vicious cycle.
It's like the healthcare industry. Don't fix the problem, just give them the pill, let it maintain. And when it comes to voting, have y'all seen anything that's on the horizon, the future? When we talk about the young voters and stuff, obviously internet, people are pushing internet, blockchain, somehow using blockchain to vote. Have y'all looked into anything like that to say, like, to try to get more people to vote, but it also be secure?
I mean, to be honest, that's not been our focus. Not that it's not important. That's not our expertise and our focus. We leave that to, other people who are in that area. I think it's only a matter of time before that stuff happens, but we are more hyper focused on the incentive structure. Right. And if our view is, if you got 100 people are voting, and they're forced to vote one way, or two ways, I should say, it's not going to make that much of a difference to have 200 people who are forced to vote one way or another, right? And my point being that until we change the incentive process and the way we can cast a meaningful vote, that substantively not much will change, even if you get greater participation.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I was just thinking about that because, I feel that's going to come in, and I always worry about the implementation of things. Because I know with ranked choice voting, there's some spots where people say, we can't have ranked choice voting. Voting, it makes it too hard and it confuses the voter and blah, blah, blah. You know, I just didn't know, you know, I just want to see if people on up front before it even gets to that stage. Like, hey, we need to be this is the things that we're going to have to say to counteract what's
well, I mean, the reform, and the reform community, I should say, like the reform communities, wherever they develop on a local level, and everything, they need to confront that, right? And that's got to be a part of the conversation. I think the good news is there were people talking about fixing our election system, like with open primaries and ranked choice voting and star voting and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are very few kind of arguing in a corner 20 years ago. Today, there are a lot more folks that these issues are more important. So they're finding each other, they're talking to each other and starting to form coalitions with each other that I think will last. But it's a matter, so it'll be a matter of time. I think there'll be lots of failures, lots of losses, and everything. But I think society will eventually, take on the political industry, and society will win because society knows we don't have to settle for these two choices, but there just hasn't been, an opportunity to strike, so to speak.
Looking over the past, 15 years about the independent voter project's been going on? What's been the most enduring success?
Well, California's nonpartisan primary.
That's the big one.
For sure. That's the biggest one, like you said. And now we're like, let's take the next step and make it a top 4, top 5. We've taken 3 cases to the Supreme Court. We authored a measure called Measure K in San Diego on a local level where candidates used to be getting elected in low turnout primaries, which really just meant that whoever the party nominated was winning in the primary.
Right.
We got rid of that because IVP authored an initiative locally to get rid of it. We hold conferences to educate legislators about these issues, and then we have a news website that covers these on a national level, right? We have stories on, what's going on, and we covered what happened in New York and, the ranked choice fights in Maine, and right now they're, trying to do a nonpartisan primary in Oklahoma, and just having a place where we can publish the information so more people can understand we don't have to accept the way things are, and there's actually things we can do about it.
If you were to do like the top 4 or 5 and let's say the last election, what would the election have looked like? How would have it been broken down? Would it have been
for president
or whichever the last election was? Yeah, president. Would you had a couple Republicans, a couple Democrats, or how would it broke down out there?
I mean, it's so hard to predict, and I think it'd be different wherever you held the election, right? Is that when you do that, it fundamentally changes who decides to run, right? As a lot of people, I don't think today I think a lot of people we would like to lead don't even consider running because they're like, I'm not going to go pretend to be somebody I'm not. I'm not going to get involved in that discussion and have to take positions that I don't agree with in order to win. And so they don't. Is that when you change the incentive structure and say, oh, this is a top 4, top 5, I can get through the primary being myself, right? And then compete for a general electorate instead of a very partisan primary electorate by, being myself and saying what I really believe. That fundamentally changes who jumps into the race. So it's really hard to go back and reconstruct and predict, okay, here's the top 4 that would be there, and this is what would happen under a system where the people who self-selected to run, did so under the conditions of a totally different dynamics.
Because I know Fox News this past weekend was like, man, this is obviously February, but they're like, currently the top 2 candidates in California are 2 Republicans. So it might be 2 Republicans on the ticket there. And I was just curious if you thought if there was open to more, would it be multiple Republicans? I guess it would be, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if you said the campaign field, you'd have 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats, right? And you'd have one that's kind of appealing more to maybe the MAGA base, one that's appealing more to the traditional Republican. You'd have a Democrat that's more on the far right, and then you'd have one that's more of a moderate or business friendly, whatever you call them, and they'd all be competing, right, for first and second and third place choices, right? Which our argument is, forget who wins. The value of that conversation and the value of the political discussion to the voters of having a more nuanced discussion, right, is so great that the outcome it matters, of course, but if the outcome itself, whoever wins is good under that scenario, right? Because merely by the fact that we've allowed different perspectives to voice themselves during the general election when more people are actually paying attention.
Right. How do you stay optimistic about building more inclusive democracy, and what keeps you grounded personally? Because I know for myself, if I don't stay focused on something, if I just stay all in on politics, boy, my life turns sideways.
Yeah. Well, you hit the nail on the head, right? And I don't got to lie and say, oh man, I don't get just frustrated and like, hey, well, there's no, but I get a 3 and a 4-year-old. I do have work outside of politics. I was a producer on a movie that's about to come out, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. We had a pre-screening on Friday. And
real quick now, you just said that. Did you do a reboot, or is this like a continue? Is it in the canon of
number 5? Number 5 did her.
Wow.
Yeah. Killer Tomatoes.
Okay, now go. We'll go back to Killer Tomatoes in a minute, but we'll let you finish. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, but when you step back and you see the young voters, see society, see the reform movements coming up, see the conversations we're having today, right? Is the optimism I have is like, I can choose to go to bed and be like, the way things are right now are leading us into, a Armageddon, right? Or say, look, there's actually all this stuff in technology, and society has just moved so much faster to politics. And now I just need to be patient and allow politics to catch up. Right. I think that gives like a society accepting the fact that you are seeing where things need to go sooner than the political apparatus can adjust to it, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So now let's go back to your Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
Yeah.
Is this your first film you've ever done?
Well, it is. So the original Attack of the Killer Tomatoes was co-written by my father and his friend Costa Dillon and John DeBello when, they actually won a high school film competition. And then that turned into them producing Attack of the Killer Tomatoes in their early 20s, on a shoestring budget. And, and then it became this cult classic where, all of a sudden people thought the movie was funny and some people thought it was horrible, whatever, but it became this cult classic. They made 3 more of them. They had a cartoon on Fox for 2 years until Power Rangers came along. And, it's been about 30 years. And, nobody has more heated discussions than me and my father. But I to say that I'm a son that's proud of his father, because he was dead set. He said, I'm gonna make one more of these before I die. I'm 70 years old and I'm gonna write a new one. He kind of took the reins. He and Costa Dillon just spent countless hours just writing scripts and going back and forth. And I am the beneficiary of being there, happen to having a digital communications company with a lot of very talented graphic designers and animators. And so we got to do a lot of work on the post-production and help out just doing the business side of making a movie. And it was a very fun project. We finally showed it to some of the world on Friday in a private screening. I'm happy to report the whole place was laughing the whole time. And now, we're going to do the real launch here come this summer. And hopefully more of the world thinks, you know what? So the movie really isn't about much. There's a lot of, government there and conspiracy and all that stuff, but we're not trying to make political points. Right.
No,
so, going back to your question, how do you stay optimistic? It's like I think the Killer Tomatoes movie hopefully feeds to that, to say, let's just relax. Things are absurd.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fear-based stuff, but let's just stop taking ourselves so seriously for a bit and look around and laugh and think, you know what? Things aren't that bad. They could be better, but we got reasons to laugh.
Absolutely. Now, did your dad and his buddy write this new upcoming one?
They did. My father and Costa Dillon, did the vast majority of the writing of the new script. And, like I said, I'm proud of them. And it turned out, I believe, very well.
Well, when I was a little boy, I can remember, I think we had just got cable at my house. And I remember seeing Attack the Killer Tomatoes on late at night, and it was the most ridiculous thing. And you're a little kid, and it's like, I think one of the jokes was the Whopper at Burger King, the tomato ate the individual, and that blew my mind. It was like, what's going on here? And when you said this, it's like, holy cow, this is wild. And I love that it's in canon. So who is there big stars, or did y'all just try to, hey, let's just get it out? Did you get stars?
There's some real stars in there, like Kochner. Probably people know him from The Office and stuff. I'm sure if you saw, Myrna from the Jack in the Box taco commercials. If you've seen her, the one that's always with Jack, the Latino woman, she's one of the lead actresses. We had a local up and coming, Noah Rizuki, who's this is a very San Diego based film. And so this is one of her first major feature films, but there's a surprise cameo at the end that I'm not supposed to give away, of an actor everybody will know. John Aston made a special guest appearance. He's, Ashton's in his 90s now. But he did some work on the new film, and, it was fun and a really talented cast.
It made me, that's I enjoy what your project, independent voter project's doing, but it makes me so happy to hear about this Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. I don't know why it got me all excited. I'm like, God, throw the voting out the window. Yeah. I want to hear about this tomato project. Was it CGI? Was it? No,
it's a live action. I mean, there's animation. Like, that's what my team did. Some of the animation sequences we did. Of course, there's CGI. There's a lot of stuff done in post production, but it's a live action movie. It's a live action movie.
And when will this be out?
Summertime. We don't have a release date yet. Like I said, we just had the pre-screening, so the movie's 99.99% done. But now it's moving on to distribution and the distribution strategy. So
now will it be in actual theaters? Will it go streaming? Okay, good.
We're gonna release in theaters first. As you know, the world today is streaming's what really matters and where the revenues come. But we're gonna do some in theater stuff, and hopefully it's fun.
Good. That is awesome to hear. All right, I'll be looking forward to that.
All right.
And I wish you well with the Independent Voter Project. Final question. And I saw John C. Dvorak ask Scott Adams this the other day. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He's from John C. Dvorak does No Agenda podcast. I was listening. The question was there anything that I did not ask you that I should have asked you?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. I don't know what gets you out of bed in the morning or something. I don't know. But my answer would be Independent Voter Project, Killer Tomatoes, and then most importantly, my wife and my two kids are obviously what's most important to me. My daughter just turned 3 yesterday, and seeing her wanted to put her princess outfit back on in the morning, like, that's the things that really matter. You step back and, like, the movie fails, if we never win a voting rights case, we never do that, you know what, I get to wake up, see these beautiful kids and a beautiful wife, and enjoy that part of my life. I'm very blessed in that regard.
That's awesome, my friend. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be looking forward to the Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. How often does your podcast come out?
Every week. We
every week.
record every Wednesday morning, try to get it up by Wednesday afternoon, and hopefully we'll do some more. But we just got going really like in earnest a couple months ago. We've been running the news website for 15 years, but the podcast component we've started and stopped. But this is now, we're officially going every week, and it's a lot of fun. My friend Karen McCormick, Karen McCormick is the reason there's ranked choice voting in Maine. Like it was her. She drove it from the beginning. Sean Griffiths, who I tell people, I go, there is nobody in the world that knows more about United States election reform than Sean, because he's been reporting on every single thing that happens for 15 years. And then we got young Ethan, who's one of those 20 somethings who's looking at both parties going, what the heck's going on? He's joined the show, and we have a great time.
Cool. All right. So we will wrap it up here. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. I'm Brian with Maximum Libertarian. That's Chad, and we will see you later. Go check out the film this summer, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes 5, and Independent Voter Project. All right.